Hey everyone, today I'll be doing a review on Dragon Quest. So for this review, I will be doing it completely spoiler free, and I'll be only using scenes in the video from early on within the game, so that there won't be any spoilers or anything. But if I had to give a summary of this review in a nutshell, I would say that this game is amazing if you love the JRPG formula. And in fact, honestly, I think that this will be the JRPG of the year because, well, this is like the only big JRPG being released right now. Kind of like how Persona 5 was the big JRPG of last year. So let me give a brief history of Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest is an old JRPG franchise. It's one of Square Enix now, but it used to be called Square. It's one of their biggest IPs, like an amazingly big IP to the point where the enemies, the monsters, like the slimes, for example, the slimes are iconic. It ended up creating a legend. It is that much of a flagship title in the genre. Well, if I had to say, it didn't invent the JRPG formula, but I think that Dragon Quest is responsible for shaping what the JRPG formula is about, because it introduced so many mechanics that everyone else copied when they were making JRPGs. A lot of the times, when you look at which game invented a genre, you get really old games that might still exist, but they're not really that notable nowadays. For example, if you look at item creation mechanics and item upgrade mechanics, it was 8 Layer that pretty much made that item creation mechanics that all JRPGs ended up using in the future. So, it's been a long time since a Dragon Quest game has been released in North America. I haven't played through all of the Dragon Quest titles, and most people haven't, because, like Fire Emblem, a lot of the old titles, they're only in Japanese, and they're actually for very old consoles that it's very difficult to get a hold of, and very difficult to find even translations of. But I played a couple of the other titles, the more recent titles, and I played what most other people, older folks have played, the PS1 game Dragon Quest 7, and also PS2's Dragon Quest 8. Probably Dragon Quest 8 was the most a big Dragon Quest title up until this point. So even though this game is responsible, this franchise is responsible for shaping up what JRPGs became, a lot of the mechanics that were kept in the game series for so long might be considered archaic by a lot of people. And I say that if you're trying to play this as your first JRPG, it's going to be weird, because it keeps mechanics kind of from the old days. But I mean, if you've been playing JRPGs for a long time, I think you'd like this game. You'd appreciate the game a bit more compared to if you're just someone who's actually playing this as their first JRPG. Now, okay, for example, the game can be unforgiving at certain points due to difficulty spikes with some of the bosses. Now, I mean, this isn't completely true. There's difficulty settings that you can adjust, but I feel like even if you're very new to this kind of game, this kind of game style, even on the easier difficulties, you might be struggling. But to be honest, the easy trick is that you just have to grind money, grind levels, grind whatever, just to get past an obstacle. On the other hand, the bosses might be difficult, but the mobs, or the basic enemy types, they're relatively easy. So it's really just a couple of noteworthy bosses, particular bosses that a lot of people get stuck on. You might be wondering what I meant by archaic mechanics. Well, like the saving feature, for example. The game does feature autosave, but otherwise, if you want to make a manual save, it's one of the kind of games where you have to make a manual save at an object, at a save point. In this case, it's churches or statues of the goddess, and which can be sometimes rare, and sometimes they do have bad level design. was really stupid is sometimes I would see, because you have to pray at the statue, so sometimes I'd see the statue to pray at the beginning of a dungeon, and then I go through the dungeon. A boss would be at the end of a dungeon, and there'd be no statue before the boss of the dungeon. Now, of course, this wasn't a mistake done all the time. No, this mistake was only done a couple of times, but it was really perplexing to me, because why would they do that? That's stupid. Because the mentality is that you'd want to spend time grinding as you go through the dungeon for the first time, and you grind and you pick up treasures, all of that. But then if you do that and then you fight the final boss, and the worst part is if you have to fight, sorry, not the final boss, the boss of the dungeon. And the worst part is if you don't have a save point or a heal point before the boss of the dungeon, then you have to fight the boss of a dungeon with like half-ass status. Sorry, not stats, because you've been spending so much time trying to grind. You see what I mean? And then you end up dying to the boss, and then the autosave didn't autosave before that. It only autosaves maybe like half an hour before that. So now you're all pissed, you know. One thing I found that I had to do was I actually would grind at the beginning of a dungeon. So just grind all the mobs right in the beginning of the dungeon, and then I would just like rush to get all the treasures, and then rush to the boss, and then hopefully beat the boss of the dungeon, which is not an ideal way I'd like to play the game. Now, of course, they didn't make this mistake for all of the dungeons. They only made this mistake with a few of the dungeons, but it's stupid because like why would they do that? You know, even one, but it's sad because okay, this game has multiple acts. So you can kind of say, like, in the old days you used to have discs, but now, you know, now we have high memory capacities on the disc, so you don't have to use multiple discs anymore. In the old days you'd have to swap between discs, but in this game you don't. But the game is still kind of separated in acts, and it's stupid because in some of the acts of the game, you would have what would be considered like not a final boss, but like a final boss of a disc. And in this game, there's a boss where it's like you go through this big meaty dungeon and then there's no save point, and I'm like, dude, like what's these people's problems? And it's still stupid because they would have like a save point, checkpoint, like in front of one of the mini bosses I had no trouble with, that I didn't need that for, and then I go to the final boss. Oh look, no fucking save point, no fucking like what the hell's with these people? It's stupid. So what I mean to say is that there's a lot of inconsistent level design. It's like it's brilliant one dungeon, then it goes like half-assed the next. Like what the hell? That's stupid. So I mean, I said that the game autosaves, but the autosaves, well, it's not really that useful. A lot of the times when I die to a boss or even an enemy, like, oh, I noticed it'd be like half an hour away. It would probably be in the last town that you visited. When I say town, I mean safe zone, like the area where you buy equipment, you can rest at inns, you can pray, like in contrast to the dungeon. So it's like you die in the dungeon, now you have to go all the way back to the previously visited town. You don't have to use the autosaves. Sometimes it might let you use certain saves, but it's not that useful because, again, archaic mechanics. You have to lose a portion of your gold. I forget if it's like a third or a half. It might depend on your difficulty setting. But yeah, like there's penalties for dying. So in fact, you might even want to just like, depending on if you're on console or PC or what you're doing, you might want to just like quickly close the game and just like reload it yourself because you know, it's archaic. Oh, lose your money. Again, it's not that big of a punishment. You can just grind for more gold, more experience. But you know, if you're a new gamer, if you're not familiar with this kind of franchise, I can see why you would get frustrated quickly. And there's other archaic mechanics like item management. For example, like you have to manage your inventories for each of your characters. So when you go into battle, each of your characters has an inventory, and you also have a tiny shared bag as well. I shouldn't say tiny shared bag. What I mean to say is that your characters will be carrying the items that they go into battle with. So if you don't equip your items individually to each character when you go into battle, like you're gonna have a hard time. So I mean, again, it's very archaic because in most games you just have a one simple inventory that's big and easy to like use. But no, in this game you want to like quickly go through each character and manage their inventory, and yeah, there's a lot of inventory management. So if you're not familiar with that kind of mechanic, you would think, man, this seems so old school, and yeah, it is kind of a bit. It's not too frustrating, but it's just a minor inconvenience. Let's talk about some things I like. One thing I like is that there actually is a very large, diverse set of characters to choose from, and in this most of the game, you're never forced to use a particular character except maybe in the beginning of the game and certain story points. But you can use whatever characters however you want. You're free to use them how you want. There's a good tactics system that you can use, so you can set your characters to just auto battle, and usually they're very smart. They'll heal, they'll use spells. It's actually one of the better auto battle systems, and I found myself using it often when I was grinding. Um, One good thing is that characters not in the party will automatically still get experience points for the battles. So what this means is that you can swap between characters. Like, let's say you're using one character from the beginning and you want to switch to another character. I guess in the end game, there are certain characters who are extremely useful, so you can actually switch without penalty. And it also has a very easy mechanic for reassigning skill points, because you get skill points when you level up your characters. And you might think, oh damn, I went through the game and I actually spent all the shitty skill points. Well, you can reassign them. All you have to do is I think it's like a little money penalty, but it's not a big deal. So it's easy in that way. There are certain story points where the characters will get their levels reset. Without spoiling anything, the best advice I give is to actually just keep going through the story. Because, yeah, at certain story points, your level will decrease, and at certain story points, they'll be giving free levels. In fact, I think, I don't know if it happens to everyone, but near right before one of the final dungeons, all the way in Act 3 of the game, I was able to get characters who were level 99. I'm like, what the hell? But it's true. I just keep playing through the game. Don't get yourself spoiled. One thing I noticed a lot of people like to rip on is the game's music, and if you play Dragon Quest games, all of the games in the IP generally do feature the exact same music. I like the music, but I do agree with people's complaints that the same theme gets recycled a bit too much. Each town has the same music. It has always the same conflict music, always the same happy music. And the worst part is, if you played these games a decade ago, it's nice because it brings back waves of good memories. But again, at the same time, it gets boring. This is a long JRPG title. I think Persona 5 beats it slightly, I think, in terms of length, but this is actually very close in game length to Persona 5. And when you're listening to this exact same theme for over 100 hours of game time, yeah, I mean, it actually does get kind of boring. They should have used old music, and they should have added new stuff as well. So I mean, yeah, it does get boring. And I won't lie, I found myself listening to podcasts and other stuff very frequently when I was playing through the game, because it gets so tiring. So, going on about the gameplay, I said to you before, this game is insanely long, and the way that most people split it up is into 3 acts. Technically, you can beat the second act of the game, and you will get a credits and an ending, but I actually wouldn't recommend doing that. You want to go through the third act, which actually has a complete, not a 30-second extension. No, the third act actually fixes a lot of the plot. A lot of the plot ties that were left unresolved get resolved all the way in the third act of the game. But to beat the third act, you might have to go through a couple of recycled dungeons. Well, you actually have to do a lot of grinding, because you just have to beat the final dungeon and the final boss for the third act. And to do that, you can grind through recycled dungeons that have harder versions of the enemy. That kind of story. You probably know that kind of thing if you've played a lot of JRPGs in the past. This game does have a lot of side quests you can do. I didn't find myself doing them. It does have lots of funny dialogue, but a lot of the side quests were really just fetch quests. Not all of them, but a lot of them were. But I won't lie, the lore of the game is very fleshed out, and even through the side quests, you do learn a lot about the places and the characters. Um, Myself, I would strongly recommend you play all the way through the third act of the game and get the best ending. You don't have to do special choice requirements or anything. It's not like it's missable. No, no. It's just long. You just have to keep going through it. It's not shitty like Shadow of Mordor. You know that game? It's not like that. When I say acts, this is actually a third act, and it actually has unique cutscenes. Yeah, it recycles some dungeons, but it actually has a lot of unique cutscenes. There's only it only replays one of the old cutscenes, and then you can quickly go through it, and then you actually see a lot of new plot events. And that's all I'm gonna say. I'm not gonna spoil what it's about. I'm not gonna spoil anything at all about the third act, but I honestly recommend you go through it. When I look at the world of the game, the world is amazing. It has so many towns. It has more towns than most JRPGs have nowadays. Remember, like, these big AAA titles, Final Fantasy 13, that had towns only in cutscenes. What the F were they thinking of? Like, in Final Fantasy 13, I'm not talking about the extensions like 13.2, 13.3. I'm talking about the original. Like, look at that. People waited a decade for that game. That's where all the money went. Oh, you wouldn't even have shops. You buy your items through save points, and then the towns would only be in cutscenes, leading to a big disconnect between you and the actual world of the game. That's stupid. This game has so many over a dozen explorable towns. They're all big towns. There's like multiple towns in each I guess I should call them city. Like you have slums, and then you have the rich part of one big kingdom, for example. Like this kind of stuff. You have other events like horse racing, casinos. I didn't do too much of the casinos. I did the horse racing, though. It's really fun. But this game really does. It really does bring back memories from the good old days before all this shit started happening. It doesn't have like shitty DLC where you actually have to buy new towns and shit. No, I mean, when I bought a game upon release, I bought a complete game. Like this makes like Final Fantasy 13, hell, it makes Final Fantasy 15 like look like shit. Like man, I love this more than that shitty Final Fantasy 15, the half-baked piece of crap that was. Oh my god, ooh, watch a movie and then play the game, and then the female lead dies within 2 hours. Like what the hell? Oh, these effing people, man. This game, you can compare it to Ni no Kuni. You remember Ni no Kuni from last year? A Revenant Kingdom? If you like that game, you'll love this game. Like a lot of the world, the happiness, it reminds me of like Ni no Kuni. And except this game does have old school turn-based mechanics, but it's very good. It has very very good tactics system. Like you don't have to. All you have to do is manually battle during the boss fights, and then you can actually just use auto fight for the regular fights if you're too tired, and then you can listen to podcasts and stuff, because I know that a game of this length might be daunting to most people, so don't worry, I understand. The random encounters are done on the map with visible enemies that you can escape, so if you don't want to grind too much, if you always want to do all your grinding at once, like if you want to abuse like certain enemy types where you can get more experience from grinding, yeah, this game has enemies that you can see like 3D on the map. It's not like the old days. In the old Dragon Quest, oh man, that was hell because you had random encounters. The only random encounters you'll have in this game, unfortunately, are on the ship when you're sailing, which can get annoying at times, but you just have to go through it quickly. The game actually has a very good fast travel system, kind of like the old Dragon Quest games as well. So it sucks because you do lose that ability after a certain plot point, so you have to go through everything again. But the zoom spell it's called. It's very useful. Of a game of this world, of this size. Yeah, don't worry. You know, it's even amazing how this game, it feels like it actually has a world map. It's not like cheesily done like Tales of Xillia. No, that game was like recycled shit. But Dragon Quest 11, like this game, oh my god, like it actually does feel like a nice fleshed out world. It doesn't feel like a bunch of, I mean, even though it is assets being used all over the place, it doesn't feel like that, you know? It actually does. Even though the graphics might be really simple, this is a game that actually has a lot of quantity, a lot of meat to it. So overall, this was a nice surprise for me, and overall an extremely, extremely refreshing JRPG for me to play. It did take me a while, but it was worth it. And you know, I'm old school. I'm not like 80s old school, but I'm 90s old school, and it really does take me back to the good old days when I used to play Dragon Quest games on old consoles. Um, I mean, again, it's not like everything in the game is archaic. This game did make attempts to make quality of life improvements, and it did try hard to be a bit modernized as well. What I'm saying at the beginning of the video, I'm just listing a few of the drawbacks you should know if you're getting into the game. If you're familiar with JRPGs, you'll have no problem. It's only if you're new with JRPGs, or even if this is your first JRPG title, then you might have a little bit of a problem. You know, one thing that also kind of pissed me off was a silent protagonist. I don't know, because people say, ooh, you can immerse yourself into a silent protagonist. I don't know, I mean, you know what I mean? That shit wouldn't fly for movies. I don't like, for this kind of game, like for a game like this, like it's not like you're making your own character. It's not like Skyrim where having a silent character makes sense. In this game, I don't feel like I'm actually interacting that much as the character. I'd rather the character just get a name and have like relationships and talk to people. I know all of the games were like this, but I didn't agree with this. Some of the plot points, the plot points are really heavy and sad, and they actually kind of get ruined by having a silent protagonist. With this level of technology, you see the characters all crying, and then you just see silent protagonists. Um, I say that having a silent protagonist in this kind of game, for this game in particular, it does break the immersion more than it helps, in my opinion. And this isn't a game where I'd want a silent protagonist. Like look at Xenoblade Chronicles and Xenoblade Chronicles X. Like look at how much better I felt like Xenoblade Chronicles was with the protagonist. Compared to the X, where it had just everything was generic, and had a shitty story. Like I loved the original Xenoblade Chronicles story, like because it had a passionate character, and you actually felt like relationships between the characters, between him and the world. I don't get that with this game, unfortunately. But honestly, like don't mind my nitpicking. This is like one of the best games of 2018. It's been obviously the best JRPG of 2018, hands down. Um, like all of the JRPGs nowadays in the new console generations, like now we're getting a resurgence, but like early on in like the PS4 life cycle, everything was so shitty about JRPGs. All you got was like less NPCs, less towns, and too many fancy cutscenes you just watch, and then afterwards you'd be sitting there with your thumb up your ass. You know, after you finish watching, cause what are you gonna do? You want to play the game. You don't want to just watch shit all day, do you? Dragon Quest was such a nice glimpse in the past, and man, I'm happy the developers, the publishers, were able to make a game that was able to wonderfully like blend old and new mechanics together well. It's weaved like in an amazing way. It's not a perfect game, of course, but if you just play the game and give it a little bit of a chance, I think you'll like it. All I hear is YouTubers shitting on the game's music. I know a lot of it's archaic. I know they're shitting on the turn-based system. I know it's a little bit old school, but overall I think that the pros outweigh the cons of the game. And overall, oh man, reminds me so much of my childhood. Maybe I'm a bit biased. I won't lie, I am biased because this game was like a lot of my childhood. Um, but honestly, pick up the game, buy it. Don't even buy it used, just buy it to support the people. It doesn't have like shitty DLC practices. It doesn't have shitty shit. It's not an unfinished piece of shit like Final Fantasy 15. Support these people. I bought a full priced game, and I got full priced content on release. I got full priced worlds, like I got full priced everything that was worth my money. And as a Canadian who uses pesos of the North, that's what I call them because our currency is so shitty. We gotta pay like so much money in taxes for the game. Oh man, this was one of the few games that was actually worth my money. So remember that you can watch my Dragon Quest XI playthrough all the way up and completing Act 3 on this channel. If you liked the content in this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and giving